Hey everybody. My name is Renita McCaskill. I'm the Deputy Director at Detroit Animal Care in Detroit, Michigan. Shelter manager, nothing special. Charlotte.
Everyone, I'm Charlotte Otero. I'm the community strategist at Maddie's Fund. I'm super excited hosting my first call with my new friend Renina here. But I want to start off by saying, in the spirit of healing, I want to acknowledge and honor the Northern Paiute and Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs people, whose traditional land I'm currently occupying in what's now known as Central Oregon. So we're really excited for you all to be here today. It's a very important call. We'll be hearing about all things fatigue when it comes to caring for companion animals and its impact on our well-being. So let's go ahead, Renina. You want to give us our question of the day? Allison will drop it in the chat as well.
Yes, let's jump into the question of the day. What's the favorite self-care activity, or what's something that you like to do for yourself to reset after a stressful day? Please drop your response into the chat, or we'll read a few of them too. For me, I like to do something creative, for like from designing graphics, from flyers and different things along that line. And since the pandemic, I like to do like different T-shirt designs. So let's see what you guys got.
I'm gonna have to see some of those T-shirt designs now. For me, I'm saying I definitely say I have to get out in nature. Yesterday, I spent the day at the lake, swimming, kayaking, getting some last sunshine before the fall comes in. So let's see what others are saying. Journaling, playing the piano, yoga, some good ones, reading sci-fi, moving so fast. Sharon's our craft lady. She's been helping me out with some of my crafting, making cards, stenciling. What else? Going to the river, yoga, music. Yeah. Selling vegan tacos. Ooh, Jess, I might have to buy some of those.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to keep dropping your answers in the chat. We've got some good ideas for some things to do. Right now, we'll open the floor for national updates. So if you have an update you want to share with the group, now's your chance to unmute. Give us little happenings that's going on with you.
I have one, Charlotte. Hi, everyone.
Go for it, Sheila.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila with CARE, and I just want to let you all know CARE is having our first conference in October. We're super excited to extend an invitation to all of you. It's really going to be the first of its kind with an introduction into our human and animal well-being framework. Thanks to our sponsors, we're able to put this on, and it's a really wonderful opportunity to look at growth and learning, especially when it comes to how inclusivity can result in increased life saving. So I hope you will consider joining us. We only have about 25 tickets left, so hurry up and register. And if you're already registered, let us know in the chat. I can't wait to see you all there.
Hi, everybody. Just a reminder that there are a few days left in August to get those entries in for our monthly Maddie's Fund cash giveaways for viewing community conversations live or on demand. Kelly's dropping the entry link in the chat. If you need to catch up on previous calls, please check them out on Maddie's Pet Forum. Thank you.
Midwest Animal Sheltering Conference is open for registration. The schedule is posted. This is going to be happening in Columbia, Missouri, September 23rd to 25th. And you can learn more. Oh, Allison, your timing is impeccable.
Oh, you beat me to
but
it.
I beat you by a millisecond.
Hey everyone, it's Lindsay from HSUS. I wanted to give my weekly Beagle update. So we are in the final couple of weeks of placing the dogs, which is a pretty incredible accomplishment because of all the groups that have stepped up to help. And like I said a few calls ago, we're also respectful and understanding of all of you that are overwhelmed and needed to say no to taking some of these dogs. So we see you too. I also wanted to say that because of the volume of dogs, we've talked to Shelter Animals Count about doing some data analysis of what the impact of placing these dogs on the animal sheltering system did, whether positive or negative, or if there were regional differences. So stay tuned for that. That may be a few months out before we can report on whether it really helped with some of the resident shelter animals or increased other kinds of engagement for the local organizations. But stay tuned if you were a group that took in dogs we will be in touch with you.
Okay, seems like we've pretty much wrapped up the updates. Um, Thanks for everybody's input. Now I'm so excited to move on to our presentation for the day. Today we'll be hearing from Dr. Taylor Miller from the Not One More Vet, who will be talking about all the things compassion fatigue. I felt this was an important topic to bring up because the climate with everybody going through after the pandemic, we were so in that cluster of everybody taking in dogs and then everybody having to go back to work and then the shelters and rescues being bombarded with so many animals coming in and us just fighting so hard to place them. I felt this was a good topic because we think so much about the animals, but sometimes we don't think about ourselves and the self help we should be doing for ourselves. So I felt this would be a good topic to talk about.
Absolutely. And I just want to give a quick little tip about participating on today's call. We know talking about these things, we're not just going to talk compassion fatigue, we're going to talk moral, ethical fatigue, all types of things. So if you are uncomfortable, now could be a good time to rename yourself. So you can click the little three dots in the top right. If you're on a computer, if you're on your phone, there's a more button there. You can rename yourself to anonymous if you'd like. If you have something, questions, comments you want to share and you don't feel comfortable, feel free to send a private message to me or Renina. We will read it aloud at the end. So we just want to make sure everyone feels comfortable talking about all of these things. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm always so excited to speak to groups of people who have a shared passion, not only veterinary medicine and animal welfare in general, but for you, this is very specific. And I love that intersection. And I'm so pleased to be able to speak to this group. I want to be clear that I have never myself worked in the sheltering world. In preparation for this presentation, I did interview 2 individuals who have worked extensively in the field, and I hope that I reflect their shared experience well, but I love to hear after the fact if there are anything that I could do to improve my awareness of the very specific ways in which mental health can be impacted in this arena. So I love to hear from you, and I can't wait to share what I've got. So fatigue and all its flavors. As Charlotte mentioned, this is an area that I'm passionate about, not only because compassion fatigue fails to identify the specifics of how we get there. I often feel like compassion fatigue is like saying pneumonia. Pneumonia is life-threatening, it's awful, but there are so many ways that we can end up in a place of pneumonia. So here are my ways. We're going to talk about moral distress, and the accumulation of moral distress can be characterized as moral fatigue or ethical fatigue. Decision fatigue, simple but underestimated in its impact on our day-to-day lives, on our week-to-week lives. Compassion fatigue, giving us that overview and that accumulated effect of how these pieces end up impacting our career success, our ability to be in this field, our ability to care, and our ability to give of ourselves. And then my favorite phrase at this time is caretaker fatigue, which I feel is a wonderful word for summing up everything that we'll be talking about. And so how do we combat that accumulation of fatigue, just generalized exhaustion? We'll start with moral distress. And there are a couple of very dense slides that I've put together. And mostly that's because I want you to have these definitions at home on those printouts. I want you to have access to these. And because, as with anything, being clear on definitions of what we're talking about can make our communication about these issues more clear. So anytime we are trending towards moral distress, we have to have a starting point, and that starting point is an ethical dilemma. And an ethical dilemma is a situation in which there is conflict between one or more of the following. And I've tried to make these specific to the sheltering world. Obviously, these categories are fairly large, but I think they're inclusive. So the first one and the most important one is one's moral values, your individual moral values that you arrive at your career with. Obligations to the patient, the individual patient in front of you. Our obligation to all the animals, the population health, which can sometimes be in conflict with the ideal scenario for an individual patient. One's workplace and colleagues. So what kind of policies are in place in the environment that you're working in? And then society at large, public health and safety. How do we address public health and safety and public trust? That's a huge one in the sheltering world, because in order to get buy-in from donors, to get buy-in from individuals, to be well thought of, we have to maintain a certain, I don't want to say facade, because we are all striving for that ideal, but the ideal and the reality, there's a large gap between them. And that gap isn't necessarily bad. It's just one of understanding and education and experience. And that gap isn't always friendly to people who want to see the shiny things, though. They want to see the shiny kittens, the shiny puppies, and there's a lot more reality behind that shiny surface. Moral conflict occurs when a professional is aware of their own morally correct path. So we know what should be done, but we can't follow through in a way that's satisfying because there is some kind of internal or external constraint. One of those pieces that I just described gets in the way of accomplishing in the way that we would be most satisfied with. And that results in the moral distress. So that psychological state of anguish, and that word is important, anguish. It's not just frustration, it's not just disappointment, it's actual anguish. Our heart hurts when an individual is unable to resolve that moral conflict and experiences a violation of one's professional integrity and obligations. An obligation, I'd like to substitute sense of duty, because one of the things that draws us into this world of caring for animals is that sense that we want to make it a better place. We want to help. There's a really strong sense of duty and of compulsion almost to help. And when that is unable to be fulfilled, when we feel that we can't help, that impacts who we are, not just what we do on a day-to-day basis. Some of the terms that you might see in our attempt to address moral distress are moral competency, which is the ability to understand those conflicting situations and use good judgment and tension. Intention's important, and then behavior when responding to them. And moral integrity, which is our goal, that ability to adhere to our moral values, which affect our sense of dignity and self-respect. And dignity and self-respect are key for longevity in any profession, in any position. We have to be able to feel like we are doing well, and this can play into it. So here's a graphic version of our ethical dilemmas and those conflicting duties, our moral values, our patient welfare, our population welfare. And I'm sure that each one of you sitting here can look at this and instantly come up with 7 or 8 examples of ways in which individual boxes conflict. There are some situations where every single box is involved and every single box is in conflict. And part of why I want this visual in your head is to recognize that you are the person who are standing there in that decision bubble. And there are going to be times when you cannot win. And it's not because you're not smart enough, you're not competent enough, you're not capable enough, you don't care enough. It's not because there is a lack in you. It's because you have 5 arrows pointed towards you and you cannot serve all of these masters well. And it's not possible, and it's difficult, but we are asked to do so. I looked up in preparation for this presentation, I looked up the AVMA guidelines for ethical decision making, because I figured that somebody should have the answer, right? And AVMA is the place with the answers. And in the AVMA, in one of their statements, giving us a priority for how to address these complicated situations, The sentence was beautiful. I should have reproduced it here, but the sentence included all of these boxes essentially. We should make decisions that best care for our patients, public health and safety, and that fit within the laws and the regulations in your area. Essentially, they said, do a good job with all of these things. And they didn't give me an out, a way to prioritize in situations of complication. And I felt like that reflected well on the preparation we have going into these types of situations, right? We are taught gold standard. We are told what the ideal is, and that's great. We should know what we're aiming for. But when the opportunity to reach that ideal or that gold standard medicine is so infrequently provided to us, we should be given more tools, and we should spend more time considering how to equivocate, how to find a middle ground that doesn't compromise that moral integrity, that doesn't compromise our sense of doing good work, and still manages to meet the demands of everything else that we have to balance. Obviously, money, funds, is one of the largest complicating factors in this collage. It dictates how much money we have to spend on individual patients, how often we are able to put individual patient welfare on the same level of priority as population welfare. That's one of the huge things that we have to deal with. Public health and safety, behavior plays into this. And when we think about public perception, the dog that may not be safe to adopt out, if we euthanize, that becomes a public perception problem. So we can't even balance the single box of public well, because if we euthanize this aggressive dog, we are monsters that don't care about the individual patient who haven't given them a second chance. But if we adopt this pet out and it bites a child, we have contributed to public safety concerns, we have damaged a child. There are all of these things. Every single decision that you make has one or more of these pieces at play. And maybe some of those decisions you have become adept at distinguishing which factor must be first. And so we get practice, and we make progress. And as we gain experience, or as we have access to mentors, we find ways through these labyrinths. But that doesn't necessarily limit the impact of making those decisions on you. Even if you've become good at making these decisions, good at balancing these factors, that doesn't mean that you are immune from the impact of having to make them. And so I want to make that clear, that it's not just that we have difficulty making them, it's that making them is difficult, if that makes sense. So the impact of moral distress. And I do want to clarify that each individual is going to have a different level of sensitivity, shall we say, to different elements of that moral decision-making morass. And some of it comes down to personality. The perfectionists amongst us have more difficulty compromising or doing half measures or leaving one party unsatisfied. So perfectionism, which is a fairly common trait in our animal care professionals, is a big piece. We can also see people pleasing as a personal imperative become difficult, because it leaves our own morals more open to compromise in our efforts to make sure that everyone else is satisfied with our decision. Personal morality, where is your set point? Where is your line in the sand? Each person's line in the sand is a little bit different, and each person's line might move as they gain experience, as they see the results of their decisions over time. And that's okay. That's growing, that's developing as a professional. But that line in the sand, if it's a very, very close line in the sand, you may have more difficulty because you'll have to step over it more often, or you will be, I don't want to say forced to step over it, but circumstances will compel that step, or else you can leave us, thank you, or else we will let you go, or else. And that or else is rarely implicitly stated. It's not often that someone says, okay, or else, but it's understood. We can all hear the subtext. We can hear the, well, we'd really like to support you this year. However, I'm a little concerned. I saw this statistic and, it makes our public uncomfortable. And there's no implicit statement that says, we're going to pull your money unless. But we hear that, we know that, we're good at the nonverbals, right? We spend our world in the nonverbals. And so we hear that loud and clear. And often we take those nonverbals not only as potentially an or else, but also often as an indication that we are failing somehow. And we are very sensitive to failure. We are not allowed to fail, because if we fail, somebody, something, somewhere suffers, and suffering is not okay. So failure is very threatening. And that subtext often invokes that sense of failure, and we work hard to prevent that. Experience, as I mentioned, can help change some situations that previously would have led to moral distress into more routine conversations. So that can be helpful. It's also important to notice that individuals who are just starting out and don't have that experience may be more susceptible or sensitive to some of these ethical dilemmas. And they're a point at which mentorship can make a huge difference. And just saying the things out loud, you can't win in this situation. That is why you're struggling. You're not struggling because you're inexperienced. You're not struggling because you don't have the answers. You're struggling because there isn't a good answer, and that's okay. And sometimes saying those things out loud can take a degree of pressure off. And so watch your team for moments when that kind of mentorship can make a big difference. Colleagues' advice tying into that mentorship, formal training in ethical decision-making can be useful. And then occupational stressors, remembering that a particular conversation on a really bad day might result in more moral distress than that same conversation on a day when you've had several big wins. So it's not isolated. We have these conversations within the world. And we've sort of talked about these things already, but to say them out loud, consequences of repeated moral distress can result in a sense of impotence or failure. And oftentimes, if we're feeling like a failure, we tend to isolate because we don't want people to know that we're a failure. And there's a shame piece that comes in, and we stay silent. And that silence and isolation can perpetuate problems. And so saying these things out loud can be very helpful, because it can create a sense of community and a sense of camaraderie that will allow us to address the moral distress pieces rather than the I am a failure piece. That's not true. It's not what's happening. We need to recognize what's actually happening and find ways to move through it. Anger and frustration, obviously, if you have to compromise yourself over and over, it's not going to feel good. And some of us respond to that with anger or frustration. Blunted moral sensitivity, sometimes when things hurt repeatedly, over and over and over, we have to train ourselves not to see it or feel it anymore because it hurts too much. And that can end up compromising our ability to see opportunities when we can make a difference. And stress, just our catch-all, this hurts, it's hard. The results of all of these feelings mean that people experiencing high levels of moral distress or fatigue will have anxiety, burnout. It's a contributor to compassion fatigue, that compromised sense of moral integrity, reduced well-being, and low job satisfaction. So moral distress is huge. Decision fatigue, although simple and straightforward, is also huge. And I do want to note that there's a fairly big lack of conceptual clarity in this area, and most of what we have is derived from human healthcare. So I have adapted it. But the pieces that felt most real or most apt were decision fatigue as describing the impaired ability to make decisions and control behavior, which is also key, as a consequence of repeated acts of decision making. I also saw it described as ego depletion, which incorporates those two pieces as well. Depleted state of two key internal resources, executive function and emotional regulation. I have executive function, emotional regulation written out there. Primarily what we're looking at is the inability to think well and the inability to regulate what we're feeling in the moment. And those things result as an accumulation of decisions build up. And so these are the things that result in that decision fatigue. And decision fatigue feels more dynamic to me. It feels like something that can accumulate over a day. So beginning of the day and the end of the day, you'll have different levels. It can accumulate over the week, the beginning of the week versus the end of the week, beginning of a chunk of time when you haven't had a vacation, end of the chunk of time you haven't had a vacation. So there are going to be lots of different points that you will feel you are at. But on the spectrum, things that will drive you towards the larger decision fatigue are being subjected to a sequence of decisions. So more decisions equal greater decision fatigue, as well as decision complexity or difficulty. And if we think about the world that we live in, the vast majority of our decisions are not only complex because of that moral morass that we've discussed, but they're also difficult and high value because our decisions impact lives, they impact suffering, and we can't get away from that, and we don't want to get away from that. But that means that our decisions aren't just where do we stock the cornflakes. I mean, yes, there are probably lots of studies that indicate, you know, there's an appropriate way to stock cornflakes and there's an inappropriate way to stock cornflakes. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. But at the end of our days, most of our decisions really do matter. And that puts more pressure on us, and that can lead to a greater sense of decision fatigue. Self-regulatory, this one can also be key. The more acts of self-regulation that we have to put on during a day can be predictive of decision fatigue. So every time you've had to go, of course I'll do that, smile. Or, well, let's think about it a different way. Every time you've had to swallow those feelings of, oh my God, oh my God. Or every time you've had to put on a good professional face. You're explaining perhaps to the brand new kennel technician or somebody who's not worked in the field much why we do have to euthanize this kitten. And it's their first euthanasia and they are dissolving. And you have to be the strong one and the one who engages with them to help regulate them. That's an act of regulation, not only of self, but of other. And that can add to our decision fatigue. And then situational, time of day, our blood glucose levels, physiologic fatigue. So how many of you eat on a very regulated schedule? I can't see everybody, but I'm sure there are lots of heads shaking. So, right, if we don't eat, this also contributes to our inability to make the types of decisions that we want to be able to make. So it all adds up on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. And what happens when it adds up? Some of us begin to avoid situations in which we have to make decisions or procrastinate. We don't want to bring those resources up one more time to make a decision. For me, this often showed up in I'll take another surgery shift. I don't want to do internal medicine. I have to make decisions. I have to figure out meds. I have to come up with a schedule. I would rather do a spay. I know how to do those. I don't have to think. That's one example of many, many, many examples of avoidant behavior. It can show up as a passive approach to decision-making and less persistence. So maybe you have something that you want to advocate for, but you are fatigued. Your decision-making ability is out the window. So whatever decision floats to the top, that one becomes what you go with. It is similar to our impulsive behavior in decision-making, which is grabbing at the first decision possible so you don't have to engage in that decision-making process. If there's an answer, you grab it, and it might not be the right one, the best one, preferred one, but if there is an answer, it's better than having to engage. And then frustration and irritation are experienced more intensely, which ironically asks us to self-regulate more, which drives us further down that path of decision fatigue. It does also actually inhibit our cognitive ability. So our reasoning ability, we start taking mental shortcuts. If it walks like a duck, it's a duck, and we forget to ask if it quacks like a duck too. And we might miss things. Worse performance when quantitative skills are required. So thinking of calculating medications or creating spreadsheets towards the end of the day, you're more likely to make math errors. And then cognitive task performance is prolonged. So it just takes longer to think about things and to come up with the same information. It also deteriorates our physical endurance. And this is likely not an actual muscle fatigue, but more our ability to tolerate physical fatigue. And our mental health consequences. It's often self-evident how all these things could wind up in being a problem long-term mental health-wise. But some of the highlights are that we have a decreased ability to engage with goal identification and our monitoring. So goals that we have for ourselves as professionals, as individuals, we're less likely to engage with the decision-making process day by day of how we get to those goals. Classic examples are, I want to eat in a more healthy manner, but that requires decisions every day on what do I pack? How do I eat my lunch? Where do I shop? How do I fix dinner? And if we have decision fatigue, picking out dinner is impossible. Have you ever come home after a really, really long, intense day and your marvelous significant other says, what do you want for dinner? And there's almost this visceral rejection of that question. Like, I don't care if it's food, I'll eat it, but don't ask me, don't try to please me, don't try to engage me. No, which is really unfortunate, right? Because that's one of those bonding moments that we have with our loved ones of eating together or making choices, and offering a choice is often a sign of love, right? It would be easier just to make you eat something, but I'm giving you this option. But in that moment, that option is not desirable and it's difficult. So it can show up in our personal lives as well. Maybe we hold it together for our professional life and then we melt all over our personal lives because we aren't able to engage in, how do you want to landscape the lawn? What do you want the tiles in the bathroom to look like? I don't care. It doesn't matter. And then of course the tiles go in and then you care a lot because they aren't what you wanted. You don't like them. And this is a problem. This is not how we want to live our lives. So there's that high rate of decision regret. An increased sense of uncertainty can also be problematic, and uncertainty can be very stressful when we recognize the value of our decisions. And then we have compassion fatigue, which, as I've mentioned, feels to me more like an end stage situation. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. I found this delightful quote as I was researching compassion fatigue. The term compassion fatigue feels like a phrase in search of a meaning. To this day, definitions overlap and wander away from each other like puppies from the nest. And I think that's representative more of the fact that as an end stage, what I feel like is an end stage, it's hard to conceptualize something when all you talk about is the end result. If you aren't allowed to say aspiration pneumonia, if you aren't allowed to say that there might be a bacterial or a viral component, it's hard to give a good sense of what that pneumonia looks like if you can't talk about what comes before. But as an end stage, it's a very good way of conceptualizing the place that we get to when all of these other fatigues add up. That physical and spiritual exhaustion accompanied by acute emotional pain that stems from a caregiving position. I thought this was a really apt definition. Some of the other definitions or associated things that we see happen when we're talking about compassion fatigue are secondary traumatic stress. And so anytime we have secondary stress, trauma, vicarious trauma, you see there are lots of different ways to describe this, that points out that we often take on the suffering of others, whether that other is another human or whether that other is an animal. And we take that suffering home with us and make it belong to us when in the beginning it belonged to somebody else. And that can add in to everything that we're feeling and everything that we're trying to manage. And this is, as I mentioned, caregiver fatigue, that piece that I feel best describes the conglomeration of what it's like to work in this world, in this field, and with animals. And here's a nice summary of some of that end stage situation. Things that contribute to that compassion fatigue state, to those other fatigue points, are lack of assertiveness, people pleasing, poor boundaries. We can see all of these play into that moral distress, that that inability to advocate for what we believe is right in preference of pleasing all those other factors. Perfectionism, self-criticism kind of go hand in hand. When things aren't perfect, we blame ourselves and call ourselves a failure, which evokes that shame. Work-related stress, exhaustion, burnout, moral distress, all of these things can make it more difficult to be resilient and to be healthy. And our professional consequences are that we don't perform as well, which is so obvious. And yet not performing well makes us feel bad, and we become distressed about it, and it feeds right back into that cycle. And sometimes if you're not in a place that is supportive or aware, you may be blamed for that job performance, which will only add back into this situation. Trouble making decisions, decreased empathy, interpersonal conflict can be huge. If you have somebody that's working in your organization who in the past has been one of your star performers and suddenly they're picking fights with everybody, this might be a really key indication that something is breaking in them and that time and space and some deliberate conversations need to happen. Not conversations that start out with, we need to fix your behavior, but conversations that start out with, hey, what's happening in your life right now? Where are you at? How can we help? And sometimes magic happens with those conversations. Poor work-life balance. Some people respond to recognizing their own fatigue by overfunctioning. They become super detail-oriented, super fixated on getting the paperwork right. So everything that they can control, they do control because everything else feels out of control. So it's not just people who are slipping out early who aren't showing up to work. It's the people who are staying super late, who seem on edge about every detail, that could be suffering from this situation. And then disengagement, which is that opposite piece. And overall, all of those things that we recognize as mental health problems, irritability, anxiety, sadness, apathy, detachment, guilt, headaches, GI distress, and sleep disturbance. So remember that our bodies show these things as well. It's not just our heads and it's not just our minds and emotions. Our bodies can tell us that things aren't okay. And if you've never been diagnosed with a GI problem, you don't have anything that would account for semi-chronic diarrhea, semi-chronic constipation, it might be worth looking at your life and saying, is there unrecognized stress here? Am I not managing my mental well-being in a way that allows my body to be healthy? Headaches, neck pain, all of these things can be really important indications that we're ignoring something big. Substance abuse, unfortunately, is a coping mechanism that many of us turn to when the world becomes too difficult. And just generalized exhaustion, once again, that chronic feeling of fatigue. Can I get an update on my time? I've lost track of where.
Yeah, you've got about 5 more minutes and then we can jump into questions.
All right, perfect. So we'll speed right through this. So here we have ended up with that caretaker fatigue, which is contributed to by the decision fatigue, by the moral distress. I didn't have time to go into one of my favorite soapboxes, which is sleep. But sleep is one of those rare categories that we have a lot of ability to manage, so long as you don't have small children or a diagnosed insomnia condition. But it's one of those pieces that we can really use to boost all of our other areas, take care of that physical fatigue. And then those modifying factors that determine how impacted we are by all of those pieces that we've discussed. And work stressors can play into that. And then our own personal makeup, our personality traits, and our individual resilience can modify how impacted we are by all of these other pieces. So sleep, I'm going to stay off my soapbox, but this is an area that we have so much ability to improve upon. It's one of the few things that we have that control over. So if you're not sleeping well, look into sleep hygiene. All you have to do is type sleep hygiene into Google and you'll have an instant of 7 to 10 tips. And oftentimes we shrug off these tips because they seem so small and simple. Decrease screen time an hour before sleep. Don't drink more than a small cup of wine early in the evening. Alcohol actually inhibits our ability to experience all of the sleep that we need, all of those different phases of sleep. Don't use your bedroom for anything other than sleep. All of these little tips, and they all seem so small and throwaway that we often forget that the cumulative impact of all of those little details can truly make a difference in your ability to experience a rejuvenating night of sleep. Off the soapbox. 7 hours, there's so much conflict right now about what what we need or what we don't need as humans. I imagine 10 years from now we'll have much better research out there, but at a minimum, 7 hours should be a goal and should be had. All right, moving on. For moral distress, some of the things that can help you become most resilient in this area are to be very clear on your personal values and boundaries. So the more clarity you have on where your lines are and what your lines look like, the more you will be able to set yourself up in any given conversation, because you already know where that line is. You don't have to figure it out during the conversation. And sometimes that can speed things up, and that can give you a sense of, this is where I stop and this is what I need to be healthy. Improving communication skills, oftentimes those situations can be made more difficult because there's a sense that if only I could have explained myself better, I could have gotten more in this category or that category, or I could have kept this patient, or I could have convinced them that this euthanasia was necessary. It wasn't just frivolous. This isn't me trying to get rid of a patient. This is important. And so our ability to advocate for what we believe can be improved with improved communication skills. Also, conflict resolution. Sometimes we walk into something that's already a conflict and we're just the new person that's coming in trying to solve the problem. And so conflict resolution skills can smooth out a situation enough that advocacy or that clarity can be gained. Training in ethical reasoning can be useful, and then managing those modifying factors so that we're walking into each of those situations with the best possible resources. Decision fatigue, employ protocols and checklists whenever possible, where appropriate. Those can take individual decisions out of your life. The decision has already been made, and if the protocols and checklists are thoughtful and agreed upon, then there's a consistency there that you can rely on. Checks and balances. So if you know you're more likely to make medical math errors at the last 3 hours of the day, maybe that's the time when you hand every prescription over to a trusted other and say, would you just glance at this and make sure that a decimal point's in the right place and that this seems reasonable? Maybe that's a great time to institute a policy where everything gets checked twice, or something, or you have charts that you can reference to make sure that for the weight that you're looking at, this is in the right area. Schedule decision making. This can be particularly helpful for those personal life pieces. So instead of coming home and then trying to discuss tile in the bathroom, you say, you know what, Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock after my second cup of coffee, I will be my best person to make decisions. Let's make all our decisions on Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning. I am not working. I'll be rested. That's a good time. And then managing all the factors that we talked about can contribute to an ability to be resilient for the decision fatigue. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to pop these both up. And these are kind of the catch-all of here's how to be a healthy person. So it's not going to be useful for me to go through all of these and say, if you can do each one of these, you'll be a healthy person. But as a reference to look at, if you are wondering, okay, all that you said was great, Taylor, but where do I start? How do I begin? How do I dive in? This is a list of things to think about to begin that journey or to continue on that journey. Mindfulness is one of the things that I think is absolutely the most useful skill that you can develop or thing that you can invest in. Mindfulness at its core is the ability to be aware of what is happening in the current moment without judgment. And improving that awareness, especially the non-judgmental piece, means that you have choices and you can make decisions. Life doesn't happen to you anymore. You are able to move through life with intention and purpose, and you can make decisions about when to invest, when not to invest, when to engage, when not to engage. But it all starts out with that ability to know where you're at in the moment without judgment. And then I'll let you look at all of those. I'll be happy to go into more of them if questions come up about them. But I want to
we do have a couple questions, Dr. Miller.
Excellent.
Do you mind me read them out for you? So one of the first ones Liam asked was, how can we incorporate Not One More Vet into our organization website with resources? What ideas do you have for them?
Absolutely. Obviously, you're welcome to link to any content on the Not One More Vet website. Anytime we form partnerships with some organizations, there's going to have to be a conversation with our executive director. I'm not part of that particular world, but we have a program that we're working on called Clear Blueprint, and it is a community mental health program that asks essentially, is your workplace healthy from a mental health standpoint? And there are different modules that you can engage in that will give you resources to improve areas that maybe aren't ideal. And they're everything from communication, respectful communication, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are all of these areas that you can use as a checklist to say, is my workplace helping my workers? And if you go through that program, then you get that Clear Blueprint certification that can tell everyone that, hey, we are a good place to work. We are taking care of our people. And it will show up in the care that you're able to provide animals.
Awesome, thank you. Another question we received from Megan asked, she said, I've been reading about compassion in the scientific literature and how it's both a sensitivity to the suffering of others and a desire to relieve that suffering. So some authors have said that it's not actually our compassion that fatigues, but our empathy that can make us feel distressed. Could you comment on whether compassion fatigue resonates as a concept among veterinarians?
Yes, and I love that you've pointed that out, because I believe that in the next 10 years, the phrase compassion fatigue is going to disappear, and we'll either see that it's called empathy fatigue, which is the actual internal sensation that we have that allows us to resonate with others. Compassion is the desire to put that empathy into action and relieve suffering. So yes, you've made that wonderful distinction that's just beginning to be circulated, and I love that. That's one of the reasons why I feel like compassion fatigue, as it's currently conceptualized, does not do a good job of describing what's happening in our community. Caretaker fatigue is a catch-all phrase. I feel like does a better job of indicating that it's not a specific point in us that's problematic. It's the fact that we are who we are in the careers that we have chosen, and all of those factors end up in fatigue. But empathy fatigue, I believe, will become more prevalent and will give us a better description of what's happening in our brain when we have that inability to connect.
Perfect, thank you. There's a few more questions rolling in. We're going to be hitting time, but I'm going to go ahead and ask these. If anyone has to drop off, feel free to. But Emily asks, can you speak at all to how to best protect staff, particularly medical staff, from public comments?
That is a question that we are actually investigating actively. We've put together a cyberbullying task force at NAMVI that it's just in its infant phases, but we want to be able to answer that question, because unfortunately, people who are not involved feel they have the right to comment on our actions without understanding the situations that we find ourselves in. So at this point, I do feel like reframing things that enter into that ethical dilemma space can be really helpful. Point out that in our attempt to do our best work, we have to balance all of these things. The public does not see that balance. The public does not appreciate those factors. They see one fact and it doesn't agree with them. So they are going to comment on that one fact. And point out to people that that comment is about this morass of things that we are balancing. It's not about you, it's about this morass. And if they were in the same position, they would be struggling just as much as we are. So try to depersonalize it and reinforce that with what we have available to us, we are doing the absolute best that we can. And if we weren't here, there would be a lot more suffering than there is without us. So reframing.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question. I think this is a great one that MK asks. What can we as animal owners do to help the mental health of vets and vet techs?
Oh, beautiful question. Partly just spread the word about common humanity and common courtesy. And I think if more people understood the depth to which any professional who works with animals does care about the outcome and does want the best, the courtesy can come out and we can work as a team. Saying thank you, I can't tell you how often just a simple thank you on a given day that's been awful makes a huge difference. It doesn't have to be flowers. It doesn't have to be a card. It can be a eye contact. Thank you for helping me today. It makes a world of difference. And offering stories of what it's like to work in the animal care world and how much we have to struggle, and let owners who maybe haven't been aware of that into that secret, that this is what it's like to work in this space. I think a lot of owners don't think about it and feel like their actions are an attempt to advocate for their pet because they're advocating against us. They feel like we are setting up a system that they can't succeed in, and so they come in ready to fight because they need the best for their pet. And if we can adjust that expectation that we want what's best for your pet, and guess what? If you walk in with donuts and a smile, your pet's going to get the best care. I mean, the best care. It's amazing. So working on that partnership piece would be the best.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know we've got a ton of other questions. We're running out of time, but all these questions are going to get answered on Maddie's Pet Forum, all these links and resources. We've got tons of compassion fatigue resources that we will be sharing. So please make sure you check out the forum. There'll be courses, all types of good things going on. And Renina, I'm going to kick it off to you to close us out for the day.
Yeah, Scott Adams, who is the creator of the Sadie Dilbert comic strip, once said, "There's no such thing as a small act of kindness. Every act creates a ripple with no logical end. So never forget the little things, because everything matters, even a simple smile."
Perfect. Thank you all. Just a quick reminder, we are not meeting next week. It is Labor Day, so take care of yourself. Do some of those great activities we've all shared, and we will see you all back on the 12th. Thank you.